JBS presents the Hampton Synagogue's Author Discussion Series with Rabbi Avraham Bronstein.
Joshua Greene is the author of several acclaimed books, including the bestseller, Here Comes the Sun, The Spiritual and Musical Journey of George Harrison, the Holocaust classic, Justice at Dachau, The Trials of an American Prosecutor, Witness, Voices from the Holocaust, and Unstoppable, which we will be discussing tonight. Joshua Greene has been a featured speaker at the Pentagon, the Judge Advocate General's College, and was honored by the New York Public Library Distinguished Author Series. He is a regular instructor before state bar associations on issues of war crimes, law. He has spoken on issues of Holocaust memory for such outlets as NPR and Fox News, and his related editorials have appeared in print in the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune, among others. His documentary films include Hitler's Courts, Betrayal of the Rule of Law in Nazi Germany, which aired on PBS, and Memory After Belsen, The Future of Holocaust Remembrance for Discovery. Greene was a former instructor of Holocaust history at Hofstra and Fordham Universities. He sits on the board of advisors to the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies at Yale University. While Senior Vice President for Global Affairs at Reuter Finn Communications in the early 2000s, he served as Director of Strategic Planning for the United Nations Summit of Religious and Spiritual Leaders. The reviews for tonight's book, Unstoppable, are wonderful. ABC says, just when we most need it, Unstoppable arrives to remind us of the resilient human spirit and its capacity to overcome the most daunting foes. A remarkable narrative from a chapter of human history that never stops grabbing us by the throat. A timely and gripping tale for all of us. Kirkus calls it a gripping account that takes readers from Nazi concentration camps to Wall Street boardrooms. Upon presenting Unstoppable with the Best Holocaust Book of 2021, Best of Los Angeles Award, the Bowler family stated, Siggy's ascent from the darkest of yesterdays to the brightest of tomorrows holds sway over the imagination in this riveting narrative of grit, cunning, luck, and the determination to live life to the fullest. Please welcome Joshua Greene to the Hampton Synagogue.
Glenn, I want to thank you for that bombastic introduction. Somebody once said to me that praise is like perfume. It's okay to sniff it, but don't swallow. I just want to read two paragraphs for you from the introduction to Siggy's story. This is after he's arrived in New York at age 21 in 1947. And he's been given a temporary residence in a hotel in uptown New York City. On the streets below his window, weary pedestrians fought driving winds and 6-foot-high snowdrifts, evoking for Sigbert, as he was known then, harsh memories of other blinding storms when starving men and women trudged forward on death marches, wearing nothing more than thin prisoner uniforms. Traffic in the New York streets snarled and drivers honked their horns, impatient to get wherever they were going. Even to a 21-year-old newcomer like Sigbert, it was clear that Americans, who never knew the inside of a concentration camp, were alive in every sense, moving purposely forward towards some vision of tomorrow. He liked that. He would do that, grasp opportunities and not allow the darkness of the past to rob him of a bright future. And in that seminal moment of his new life, Sigbert made 3 promises to himself. First, he would never go hungry again. Second, he would marry a Jewish woman, have children, and help rebuild the Jewish people. Third, he would preserve Holocaust memory and speak up whenever he witnessed injustice. He had no illusions about such vows. He knew better than to think he could change the world. Anti-Semitism would never go away, and Jews would always be persecuted. That was just business as usual. Still, the Almighty had saved him, and now his job was to grab whatever scraps remained from the rubble of his life and cobble them back together into an edifice of yet to be determined size and shape.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, my first question is for you, Joshua, and it's a question more about coming to write this project. So the question is, how did you come to be in a position to write this book? Did you have a connection to the family before, or a connection to Siggy from before? And if you did, or if you didn't, as you began the project, did you have any preconceptions about who Siggy Wilson was before you began the process of writing the biography?
Okay, a good question. There was no prior connection other than the fact that I had known about Ivan from his recordings of spiritual songs, songs about a world at peace. And Ivan had read some of my previous books, so we kind of liked each other. And I guess the initial impetus or the initial feeling was, this isn't for me. The Holocaust is such a dark period, and having written quite a few books previously and having produced some films of that era, I really thought I was done. And then Ivan very insightfully provided me with transcripts of his father's testimony for the Shoah Foundation, and that did it.
So I guess the next question is back to Ivan then. What did you see in Joshua that made him the person who was going to write this story?
Well, I knew he had good taste in music, because he liked my records, and I knew he had a Holocaust-minded author, and would appreciate the story, and I thought he was the right one at the right time.
Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, right? Obviously, you grew up in your father's house, and the story is such a heavy story. Your father's story of surviving the Shoah, being in 2 camps, being on 2 separate death marches, really all before he turned 20, and then finding his way to America after that. Can you talk a little bit about the responsibility that you feel growing up in a home with somebody who had that story? What responsibility do you feel now kind of expressing itself in the writing of this book?
Well, the responsibility that I felt my entire life was to do whatever I can to help people, the Jewish people who had suffered the most, and people in general. It was to never forget the story. It was to keep telling it. And my father got his wish. Multiple myeloma almost robbed him of that wish, because being being a workaholic, he never had time to finish his memoirs or to finish telling the story. He started many times with this secretary or that secretary, and he never would get past first base because another crisis at the business would happen, and he'd be distracted, and this, that, and the next thing happened. So getting this book published was fulfilling a man's dying wish, because he was not able to do it himself in his lifetime, and having that book turn into a movie or a TV series is the second wish that he had, because it's a story and with lessons that are universal, that everyone from every country and every language, every ethnicity, and every religion can identify with, and it needs to be told. It's the diary of Anne Frank for the next century.
I'll ask you one more question along the same line, and then we'll go back to Joshua. Right? Growing up in your father's house, you must have heard his stories of experiencing the Shoah, surviving the Shoah so many times. And I'm wondering, as you read the chapters in the book that describe your father's experience, does does it ring true to the way that you heard the stories growing up, the stories the way you remember them?
Well, yes. I was interviewed for the book, so they came from my memory of what he told me growing up, and some things my brother, sister, and I never even learned until he gave the Shoah Foundation interviews, and I'm not sure, but whether psychologically he wasn't able to talk about it until then, knowing that he wasn't going to be around long, or whether the chemo itself made him more emotional and sparked something in his subconscious that made him tell more stories that we had never even heard of before.
I'll ask you for one of those later, but I want to ask Joshua a question now. And the question is, as you read through this book, there's so many aspects of Siggy's life that were larger than life. Right? He was, the experience of surviving the Shoah and coming to New York basically penniless. The experience of working and becoming like a stock owner, buying a few shares of stock, and then using that to take over an entire oil company. And then, a few months later, basically becoming a leader in that company and becoming the president of it. And then becoming the leader of the bank that he bought to support his oil company. And going from pennies when he first came to America to all those billions of dollars that he was able to amass over the course of his incredible career. Right? He was larger than life in so many ways. He was a mega philanthropist at the highest levels. He was an art collector. He did all these different things. And my question is, when you write a biography of somebody who's so over the top in so many ways, how do you tell a story that's a human story and not just get wrapped up in all the flash and circumstance?
That's a wonderful question. Biographers are burdened by this responsibility of having to condense someone's life into 300 pages, and that's not fair. No life can be summarized that briefly. So the author, someone who feels the responsibility of that and wants to be an author of integrity, will do the extra homework. And for me, it meant interviewing about 100 people, family, friends, former employees, former executives from his companies, former customers of his companies, and almost without exception, everyone said the same thing. This gentleman, who was less than 5.5 feet tall, they remembered as a giant of a personality, someone who dominated the room. I think having been the object of so much scorn, torture, beatings, starvation, he came determined to set an example of what it means to not allow tyrants to beat you down. And he did that. He managed his nightmares. I think that's the way to say it. Survivors never escape their nightmares. Siggy found a way to manage them and took that energy, and it fueled him in his drive for establishing a position from which people would have to hear what he had to say about the Holocaust.
Okay, I think that's a very fair answer. How do you decide what parts of his life to focus on more? The Holocaust part of his life was so significant and so profound, but it was over before he turned 20. Right? He lived so many more years, he did so much more. Do you see this as a Holocaust book, or do you see it as something else?
Our decision from the outset was to not assume that a reader knew anything at all about the Holocaust. And frankly, today, most people do not know anything about the Holocaust, and those who think they do have a only partial and often misimpression about what the Holocaust was. So our decision from an editorial perspective was to make sure that everything was explained clearly. That's about 25% of the story. The other 75% is what you've been describing, namely Siggy coming to America and demonstrating what he was capable of doing. I guess for me, if there's a trick, if you will, to this story, it was emphasizing his sense of humor. This is a man who, having seen such horrors, loved his life. He loved his life with a passion that inspired me to spend 7 years researching and telling his story. I love telling this. Ivan's father would get up in the middle of a dinner in a restaurant, and he would start singing and dancing, right in the middle of the restaurant, in the middle of the meal. You know, to dream the impossible. And people would be nudging Ivan, saying, you know, has he owned the restaurant? Say, no, he loves his life.
He's like, not yet.
Not yet. Very good. That inspired me. I think Siggy possessed qualities that I wanted to develop in my own life. That wicked sense of humor, that sense of absolute dogged determination, a dedication to a noble cause, that appealed to me.
Yeah. Ivan, you know, since you know your father's story so intimately, and we don't want to give too much away because we want everyone who hasn't bought the book yet to buy the book when the program's over. But can you share just one detail that somebody who thinks they know the story of Siggy Wilzig and has like a general sense of the arc of his story wouldn't know unless they read this book?
Well, they wouldn't know that he was as extreme. I mean, he was a man of extremes. So he either had no time for us because he was at work building his empire, or he would go out of his way to do things that were exceptional and very meaningful. He would walk with me 3 miles on Shabbos. He wouldn't drive on Shabbos. Technically, I shouldn't have been playing Little League on Shabbos, but he wanted me to have a normal American life too, besides my Jewish life. So he would walk with me 3 miles to the field so that I could make the tryouts. So it was always a balance of extremes.
Okay, Joshua, as you were doing those 7 years of research and going through so many interviews and so many records and so many documents and documentary histories that began, all those different talks, what really jumped out at you that you didn't expect to find about Siggy Wilson?
What jumped out at me about this man was an uncanny ability to intuit what was going on in situations that he had had no experience about. Whether it was taking over an oil company, taking over a bank, figuring out how to do end runs around the most terrifying of anti-Semites. I mean, oil and banking were the 2 most anti-Semitic industries in post-war America. He didn't consciously choose to go into those fields, but doing so, he had one device. If he sensed that kind of Jewish hatred in a business meeting, he would take off his jacket, he'd roll up his sleeve, and he would show the prisoner number tattooed on his arm. And he would shake a finger in their face and says, the last person to try to intimidate me was Hitler. He didn't succeed, and neither will you. And he put his jacket on, walked out of the room, and beat them at their own game. That was pretty impressive.
That is pretty impressive. Here, Ivan, maybe a more personal question. Your father was such a larger-than-life figure, and he, like you said, he did everything in extremes. Right? You've lived a bit of a colorful life yourself. Certainly, I wouldn't maybe extremes, but you've had varied careers in the family business, recording industry. Certainly in the Hamptons, you're a larger-than-life character, not unknown to local media. If you think about your life in relation to your father's, and this is not really related to the book, it's just a general question, but I'm interested now. Would you say that you're following in your father's footsteps in that way, or that you're kind of rebelling against him?
A combination. A combination. He wouldn't approve of half the things I do, and he would be doing cartwheels and flipping out and shebbing nachas that I'm doing the other half of the things I'm doing. So it's yeah, exactly. So it's both again. It's always both. It's always both of them.
What's it like sort of stepping into your father's shoes in terms of the family philanthropy? I know there's an organization that we'll be talking about at the end of the program tonight. And in general, you've taken over a lot of your father's philanthropies and organizational responsibilities. What's it like kind of stepping into those shoes in that way?
Well, the things he would be most proud of are two things that he wouldn't, that weren't like typically Siggy. Mm-hmm. One was that I created a character. My performance name is Sir Ivan, aka Peaceman. Mm-hmm. Why Peaceman? Because I took all the iconic songs from the anti-war songs from the 60s that had to do with women's liberation, civil rights, gay rights, environmental rights in the 60s, and I reinvented them for a whole new generation. So it shows that my music career was inspired by the fact that my father was an Auschwitz survivor, and I had 59 of my relatives murdered that I never got to meet or see or say hello to or anything, or love or anything. So having lost all those family members from a child, it inspired me to do, not just to be another song and dance man, mm-hmm. There's plenty of those, but to sing songs about improving the world and social justice and things like that. As far as his following in his footsteps, he would have thought I was mashug enough that I wear capes like a superhero with a giant Swarovski peace sign on the back and call myself Peaceman. Mm-hmm. When I was in the banking business, it wasn't exactly the attire for a banker. But he would have had to appreciate that I knew how to get attention, mm-hmm. and I used that attention for noble causes.
So, I want to talk more about that just for a little bit, because you're talking about how you took those old songs and all that old sentiment from the 60s and you made it newly relevant for a younger generation, right? The electronic music generation. In the beginning of this conversation, you said that this book, Unstoppable, is kind of the Anne Frank diary for the new generation, right? For contemporary American kids, or the contemporary American generation. I'm wondering what you think is so contemporary, like so meaningful right now about your father's story.
Well, in the case of Anne Frank, we're talking about a teenage girl that was in hiding from the Nazis. Unfortunately, she died in Bergen-Belsen from typhus. But in my father's case, we're talking about a Jewish teenage boy who went through hell. And there's a lot of young people that don't go through the same hell as Auschwitz and Mauthausen, but are going through their own personal hell because they either lost family relatives, suffered from a certain disease, suffered from poverty, suffered from discrimination, suffered from persecution. And in that respect, they can all benefit from reading this book, because it's a book of hope, resiliency, determination, and if Siggy can do it, so can I. So anybody who suffers at all from depression, loneliness, post-traumatic stress disorder, this book will be a tool for psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, anybody who works with troubled people. This book is a helping hand, because you can't help but be amazed. You can't help but draw strength from it. And relatively speaking, it's like, I could get over this if he could get over that, and still do so much with his life that was important and productive and helpful.
I can't think of a better way to end the formal part of the program, so thank you for that.
So as the son of a Holocaust survivor, I've known other Holocaust survivors, but they never, ever talked to their children about what they went through. And a lot of them didn't make those comments till after Spielberg came out and had them being interviewed. And it was a very, very tough decision. I myself, I'm not the child of a survivor, but the son of an infantryman in World War II, who was seriously wounded, Purple Heart, never ever discussed his situation. And he passed away before Private Ryan came out, but once My wife got him in a car, and we had a discussion as we were going down to Washington, and he described in detail what D-Day was like, or invasions for him. Did your father discuss what he went through when you were a child? Was that after a period of time?
Child, no, because it would have been too traumatizing and too frightening for any child to deal with. So, but I would say from 13, from my bar mitzvah on, he started to feel like I could handle the stories and should learn the truth and learn history, and so that I could be prepared to with what life is all about.
Were you able to handle that?
Well, like I said, when I was a child, there's a couple cute stories in the book. I said, as curiosity, what's that number tattooed in your arm? And he said, oh, I have a bad memory. That's my phone number. I put it there. So I was this innocent child. I said, oh, okay, that makes sense. Why would I think my father's lying to me when I'm a little kid about what's on his arm? So I thought it's his phone number. Another cute story, I go like first grade, second grade. Everybody's on the playground. Their fathers did in World War II. One says mine was a corporal in the Army. Another says mine was the sergeant, and this one in the Marines, in the Navy. And they all turn to me and go, so what did your father do during the war? And I was like, I didn't know what to say. I said, I don't know. I'll find out. I'll ask him, and I'll get back to you. And my father, with his combination of wanting to protect me and his sense of humor, he said, go back and tell the kids your father was a lieutenant in the French Navy. So I said, went back to school the next day, and they all said, so, what did your father do in the war? I said, he was a lieutenant in the French Navy. And they were all like, in awe, like, wow, that's a higher rank than our dad's. And they were blown away by that. So that's the kind of sense of humor he had, but he had the common sense to know not to expose the children to that. And then, and at 13, we probably started to learn the gory details and the sad details of what they did to people and children.
This brings the program to a close. So Ivan Wilzig, Joshua Greene, thank you so much for joining us. This was really spectacular.